Hello, everybody. Live at the bus. Kind of breezy out here. You can hear the wind blowing. All right, talking about chapter 18 and answering any questions that you may have from the bus. I'm here. Long drive. All right, I'm starting on chapter 18, which is on 187. No, Peter? No. I'm telling you, I'm in Alaska. Anyway, starts with Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. And this is one of the pieces that was underlined and marked by Chris. And it takes us back a little bit, a few pages before, to Tolstoy on 169, where Jon Krakauer found that a passage out of Family Happiness by Tolstoy had been marked. And according to Krakauer, he believes, based upon what he has seen and the evidence and in his books that he has marked, that Chris found his meaning of life and found what he wanted and was ready to come home. Evidence supports that. Things that are in the book support that. But it's the highlight that he says, a secluded life in the country, being useful to people, rest, nature, books, music. And then, of course, he must have been speaking to a woman, you as a mate and children. What else could any man desire? Well, 18 starts with a line out of Dr. Zhivago, which talks about, in the centuries of systematic explorations of the riddle of death, with the view of overcoming death. That's why, the fact that sorry, Emily, the fact that man is greatly motivated by the overcoming of death, or the answering of the question of life, immortality, and so on. And he says you can't do any of this stuff. It's what causes us to pursue mathematical infinity, electromagnetic waves. Why we write symphonies. It's what makes us human beings. Okay, and but so you can't do it without faith. And in this, he talks about this quote: "You can't make such discoveries without spiritual equipment, and the basic elements of the equipment are in the Gospels." It's a promotion of the Bible a little bit, and he says, "What are they? What are the Gospels?" Well, to begin with, love of one's neighbor, and he underlined that. Now, you don't have to be a devout Christian or Muslim or Jewish person to be good to your neighbor, right? And that's what he's after. He's not so much talking about this in a Judeo-Christian sense, but also just in a human sense. There's nothing wrong with being good to your neighbor. And if you remember, as a young man, McCandless would go to the poor sections of D.C. He would give out free food, take people for rides, and go out into the seedier parts of town. And then he studied the disadvantage in college. The apartheid was the big class that I remember. And so he has that sort of preternatural tendency to root for the little guy. And part of that is because his abhorrence with his father's pursuit of money and riches and fame, or maybe fame's not it, but definitely capitalism in all of its destructive forms. Moving on, this chapter really gets into the cause of his death. And so much has been made about how he was just a inexperienced kid going up to Alaska, where I am standing right now by the bus, that you could not, that he deserved it. And he deserved his death, or he asked for it, if you will. And that's really not what Krakauer has shown here. Even though Krakauer has pointed out the flaws and the mistakes that Chris McCandless has made, he does seem, for every mistake he points out, does seem to justify or maybe clarify the positives or defend Chris in many ways. And here's a perfect example. He said he was actually right about a moose and not a caribou. Krakauer believes he proved that. They also said he ate the wrong seeds, and though he was an idiot, basically, because he had the book and ate the wrong seeds anyway, caused his death. But it turns out, according to Krakauer in the study that he claims that he had done, that it wasn't the wrong seeds, that the seeds that he was eating were the correct ones. However, because they were in baggies and damp, they got moldy. And that mold caused Swansonine. I think that's how you say it. And of course, the explanation of Swansonine and the disease and what it does not sound good. But Krakauer wants you to know that his accident was a death. His death was an accident and not so much due to hubris, though there was a little involved in that, the no map and that kind of stuff. But they says the effects of Swansonine poisoning are chronic. The alkaloids rarely kill outright. The toxin does the deed insidiously, indirectly, by inhibiting an enzyme essential to glycoprotein metabolism. Fun. But basically creates a massive vapor lock, as it were, in the mammalian fuel lines. The body's prevented from turning what it eats into a source of usable energy. If you ingest too much of this, you're bound to starve. And that's what happened to him. And he goes very much, he wants, again, and why would Krakauer do this? Simple. Krakauer relates to this young person. He relates to Chris McCandless in so many ways. The troubled relationship with his father, this pursuit of nature, the wanting to prove himself as a man, all those things are issues that Krakauer himself has dealt with. And he's come close and skated right around death and has a empathy for Chris. And then he gives a little more description of the starvation, which is rather grim. But you will see if you watch the movie that Krakauer was involved in also. But Sean Penn, the creator of the film, also had that sympathy for Chris McCandless, and his death with at the end. I'd say that the Krakauer and McCandless both sort of, Krakauer and Sean Penn both put a sort of positive spin on it. And it's easy to put the positive spin on it, right? The last note that McCandless left was, "I have had a happy life and thank the Lord. Goodbye. May God bless all." And there's a picture of him by the bus holding the sign. And, the last lines of the book are telling. McCandless was at peace, serene as a monk gone to God. And Krakauer, I think, likes to think that on his deathbed that he was in some form of peace with himself and with his fate, though the description of the starvation is not good, and that's on 198. Starvation is not a pleasant way to expire. In advanced stages of famine, the body begins to consume itself. The victim suffers muscle pains, heart disturbances, loss of hair, dizziness, shortness of breath, extreme sensitivity to cold, physical, and mental exhaustion, and it goes on from there. So bringing this to an end, Krakauer then includes the epilogue where he actually brings the parents to visit the bus right here and talks about the fact that the mother left other things there with notes about it. Don't leave your parents in the lurch about where you are if you end up here. And this bus here has become a sort of a pilgrimage, a little bit like Thoreau's cabin at Walden, but that's a lot easier to get to. You take the highway right out of Boston, Massachusetts for about 20 minutes, and you're there in a park with a parking lot and a footpath that goes there. So this is a little bit bigger of a trek. Believe me, I can tell you I'm here. Some of the Into the Wild questions that I was asked to answer before we break for the school year. Why did Krakauer put this kid on a pedestal? I think it's one, after he wrote his initial article in Outsider magazine, people were mean. I mean, they said very nasty things about Chris and basically said he's an idiot that deserved what he got. I think Krakauer, because he felt a certain connection to the kid, thought that was a little harsh. There was no sympathy. So he wanted to go out and see what he could find. And in that process, he found that he believed the kid was pretty much in the right on most things and understandably fled from his family. I think he just wanted to defend him, or at least if he proved, kind of like what Thoreau said, I went to the woods to live deliberately. And if life proved to be mean, tell the world it's mean, it's sublime, do that. I think Krakauer wanted, I think it was originally like a 900-word article. I think he wanted the kid's life to be more judged by more than 900 words. But a good question. One question was, did he die from eating the wrong seeds, or did the book fail him? And when I just explained that, it was actually Ziploc, which a Ziploc is a great idea. It just, they were wet and molded. His sister wrote a book that might be of interest to some of you. It's called The Wild Truth by Corinne McCandless. I have not read it. It is on my reading list, but it is her perspective years later. And my understanding is Krakauer sanitized the abusive relationship that the father had. He was abusive physically to the kids and also physically to his wife. And that was another one of those things that's thrust Chris out. Somebody asked if Jon Krakauer could be impartial. Krakauer has never been impartial to anything I've read of his, and I've read most of his books. He's one of to me, the best writers around. His style, the fact that he can have a $25 polysyllabic word in the sentence followed by the F-bomb is an interesting way of writing. And he's just very good. But I read his book on Everest. He was on Mount Everest when a storm came in and killed, I think, 8 people. He barely survived. He wrote a book called 3 Cups of Deceit, ripping on another book called 3 Cups of Tea. He investigated it as a fraud. He wrote a book on Pat Tillman, who gave up the NFL to join the Where Men Find Glory or Win Glory. None of these are dispassionate. They are all biased in a way that he took it up because there was something about it. Now, he goes way out of his way to prove himself, but he's definitely not the impartial observer. And he makes no bones about it. He doesn't hide it, okay? Is Chris selfish for running away? That's that'd be a great conversation for a full class, would it not? I think of Tom Wingfield. Was he selfish for running away? He hated living with his mom, he hated going right down the path of his father, so he took off at the penalty of his sister. I think that's fiction, Tom Wingfield, but in real life, Tennessee Williams left his own sister, and so there was that truth to that. And I think probably Chris McCandless did regret running out on his sister. And then finally, there's a line that the wilderness is the rare transcendence where men face themselves and the ability to adapt and overcome. That was, sometimes this is something we talked about through the book. It's a challenge. It tends to seem to hit males more than females, but this idea I can go out here and survive, and that has been a sort of a telling thing we've talked about all through here. So if you have any further questions on the book, feel free to send me an email or send me a message on Instagram. But other than that, I'm going to take a walk around this bus here and see what I can find. I'm getting kind of hungry. Probably have to do some fishing. See ya.